back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Kaylin. If you're not new, thanks for coming back. Always happy to have you. Today begins some of the first of my favorite videos of the year that I make. Kind of the end of year wrap up, getting ready for the new year of reading is something that I absolutely love to do. So I am very, very excited to share one of those videos with you today and get going in the new year yearly wrap-up era that is coming. I'm filming this today, November 12th. By the time you see this video, it's probably a little bit later this week. We have just about a month and a half left of 2023, which I can't believe it's already almost over. Like, that flew. Anyway, some tips and tricks to maybe meet your reading goal, increase your reading speed at the end of the year. I did this video for the first time last year, so that will be linked here in the cards for you if you want to take a peek at that one. This video will have a couple different things. It will have first some tips that I have found throughout the year to help increase my reading. It will also have some book recommendations for books that I think are short, are quick, fast-paced, or just like kind of easy reads that you should be able to speed through in a reasonable amount of time. It will also cover some of the books that I read in 24 hours that just like completely consumed me that I can share with you as well, and maybe it'll do the same for you. That being said, I would love to see how many books were you aiming to read this year in 2023. What was your goal? I always go back and forth on if I really care about my reading goal, if it's something that I'm going to prioritize throughout the year. I will say 2023, I think I said it last year, but we've already capped it. This year I have read more than I have read in my entire life, and I'm super, super proud of that. I've actually already met my Goodreads goal at this point in time. I've read 45 books so far this year. I think I'm on track to read at least 50, but that will be the highest I've ever read. Last year was the closest I have got to that. I read 35 books last year, but I've already read 10 more, and I still have a month and a half left of 2023, so we will see what happens. First, let's talk about some tips that I have found if you're looking to increase your reading goal. And another little disclaimer before we get started: if you do not meet your reading goal, or if you are just wanting to be happy with what you read this year and just enjoy your books, rock on, more power to you. I totally respect and I get that. I think that is totally a valid way to look at your reading. Do not feel like reading needs to be a pressured thing. I feel like a lot of times on Book Talk, on BookTube, on Bookstagram, we see a lot of people who read 200 books in a year, which props to them, good for them. I literally do not think I could ever do that, but don't feel like you need to read a billion books to have had a good reading year. And if you enjoyed what you read and you read 3 books, that is all that matters. Reading is about enjoying it, escaping, and just having a good time. So if you don't want to put pressure on your reading, totally don't feel like you have to. Now let's get into the tips, the tricks, and all the good things. One tip that I'm going to go against from what I said last year was, last year I said that it was really helpful to have a limited amount of books to choose from, because it really made me stick to my TBR and like only have one book at a time that I was really excited for. I wasn't getting super distracted. I think the opposite is true for me this year, and maybe it's just kind of like where my headspace has been, but having my whole library again, I have these 2 shelves, I have another set of these shelves upstairs, I have a ton of books. There's also like stacks of books on either side of me. Having all of my books around me again has also just been really good for my soul and my spirit to like see the things that I love every day. But having a lot of options has been really, really helpful for me. It just, especially because so many of these were in storage, I forgot about the books that I loved, that I was really excited for. So I felt like every time I went to go find a book to read, I had an option that I was really, really excited about. The opposite was also true. If I started reading a book and I wasn't feeling it, I didn't have to be like, well, shoot, I don't have another book that I would really be happy to read right now. I had plenty of options. Having other books to be excited about in case one went awry, wasn't as cool as I thought it was gonna be, or just wasn't what I was feeling in that mood, was super helpful and made me keep reading. One thing that I really struggled with last year, but I did utilize this year, was starting multiple books at once. But it definitely had to be 2 different genres. I could not have 2 young adult fantasies, 2 romance books going at the same time. They'd be very, very different. For example, I read Circe at the same time that I started reading Beach Read by Emily Henry. A romance, contemporary, fun, light, happy romance with a really, really heavy, dense, dark academia mythology retelling. very different vibes. I'm not going to cross those story paths. So if you can read more than one at once, I think definitely do it. I also think separating the mode of reading is also really helpful, and I also utilize that definitely in the last half of this year. I would have a book going on audio, and I would have a physical book, and at times I also had a book on my iPad, so an e-read as well. Having the different formats, even if the plots were a little bit similar, but like knowing that I'm listening to one, I'm reading one digitally, or I have a physical place in a book, helped me keep all of those stories separate, but I was then consuming books more throughout my day. Audiobooks were a huge help for my reading goal this year. I didn't really get into them until the summer when I was trying to get ready for teaching, and I wanted to be taking in stories and using the time that I would have been reading to do classwork. Was really helpful. So I had books on in the background, and that kind of like started a whole audiobook like tangent for me. I've never really been an audiobook person. Previously, I've always felt like they didn't hold my attention, but I have been using audiobooks literally more than ever this year in 2023. I think I've listened to at least 10, but we might be approaching 15 audiobooks this year. Also, I think audiobooks, use them to your advantage. If you can insert more places in your day to get reading time in or to take in stories, you're going to hit your goal a lot faster. You're going to move through books a lot quicker. Most days I am listening to an audiobook on my way to work and on my way home. I have about a 45-minute commute, so I can listen to about an hour and a half of an audiobook every day, which adds up pretty quickly, especially because I listen to them on like 1.5 speed. So I cut down some time, and I'm spending a lot of time listening to them. I also find when I'm doing things around the house, like I'm cleaning or I'm folding laundry or I'm making dinner, having an audiobook. Making dinner is a little hard because I feel like I have to focus a lot, so my focus isn't totally on my audiobook, but just having them in the background while I'm doing things that would normally be very torturous and very not fun for me, I'm taking in those stories and I'm really, really enjoying them. I've found a couple of audiobooks that have absolutely like sucked me in, and I've ignored some responsibilities to keep listening to my audiobook. One thing that I've also been doing with audiobooks that has been very helpful for them to keep my attention, I might listen to my audiobook but do something else. So I might listen to my audiobook and I might knit for a little bit, or I might do some word searches, so I'm doing something with like my hands but also still listening to the audiobook. If you struggle with audiobooks and attention, that might be helpful for you. Those have been very helpful for me. I gotta say, this year I really dove into the watching booktube. I feel like I've had my stints of like all I watch is booktube, but this year more than ever, really the only YouTube videos I have watched have been booktube related or Dungeons and Dragons related. Truthfully, Critical Role and booktube are all that I be watching on YouTube these days, and I am totally fine with that. But watching booktube has just really made me excited to read and to vlog. And they've also given me really, really great book recommendations. So if I ever find myself in kind of a reading slump or wanting to get excited about reading, I go see what my favorite creators are watching, what they're reading, watch their videos, see what they're reading right now, and then I get some inspiration and I kind of want to go read whatever they're reading. I also feel like booktube helps me romanticize my experience. Even the little b-roll clips of somebody making a latte, going to get comfy, lighting a candle, getting a nice blanket, getting cozy to read, makes me want to go replicate that in my own life. So using booktube and bookstagram not as a means of comparison but as a means of inspiration has really helped my reading experience this year. Also, truthfully, romanticizing my reading time where I make myself a nice little latte, I light a candle, I clean my house, I go get a comfy blanket, put on some ambiance on my TV, has really made me just like feel immersed in my reading experience, and it's just made it even more relaxing. This is, I think, kind of just a standard, but I, especially this year, have brought a book with me literally everywhere. In case I find a couple minutes of downtime, I'm gonna sneak a few pages in. This isn't, I think, the best strategy if you're like at a crunch time. I think bringing your book everywhere is not gonna necessarily make you meet your goal. But for me, it's just been the habit of like always having something to read on me has made me utilize those things, or utilize that downtime to just get a few pages in, get excited about what I'm reading. So literally everywhere, it doesn't even matter. I went to my sister's house yesterday to hang out with my new nephew and my parents, my sister. I knew I was not gonna have time to read while I was hanging out with them because I'm not at that level of antisocial, but I stopped to get Starbucks for all of us, and I knew that Starbucks was gonna take 15 minutes to make my drink, so I brought my book and I read a couple pages while I waited. Or if I have a few minutes at lunch at work, I'm gonna bring my book with me and I'm gonna read a couple of pages. I'm waiting for a pickup order at Target and it's taking a little bit longer. No worries, I got a book. I have an appointment and I show up a little bit early. Don't worry, I got a book to read. So just keeping the books with me keeps my reading fresh in my brain, gives me a couple of opportunities to read a little bit more throughout my day and get some pages in. Now we're gonna talk about some books that I think would be really great if you're like trying to read something quick and get up your numbers a little bit for reading. I'm also in the same vein gonna tell you about books that I read in 24 hours. There were a lot this year. I was actually just updating my reading journal with all of the books that I've read this year and the dates, and there were a lot more that I read in 24 hours than I expected. I romanticized my coffee and now we don't have a place to put it, so we're just gonna prop that right there. First, I have some fantasy recommendations that I think would just be really, really quick and lighthearted and like easy reads if you're looking to get through them. The first, this is actually not the book that I am intending to talk about, but a friend of mine has this copy. So we're gonna go with the sequel. We have, this is Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree. The real book that I read this year, and I read not in 24 hours, but I read very quickly, was Legends and Lattes. This book I feel like took over Book Talk at the beginning of the year, just as a lighthearted, kind of like if you love D&D, you'll love this book kind of vibe. And it really was just like a lighthearted, happy, low stakes, warm hug from a friend fantasy read. It follows Viv, who's an orc that's been an adventurer previously, but she's decided to hang up her sword and start a new sort of adventure and settle down in a town where she opens a coffee shop. As she's opening this coffee shop, she is also learning a lot about the people in the town around her. She makes kind of her own found family community within this village, and she's going on a new adventure in the second book, which is Bookshops and Bone Dust. Listen, it's about an orc, it's got a bookstore in it. I love books about the bookish things, a little low stakes, happy, cozy fantasy. I'm in. This is also, these are pretty short. This one specifically is 330 pages, so that's not a terribly long read. They go really quickly, they follow a pretty predictable plot structure, they're friendly characters, and it's low stakes, it's not very intense. The world building isn't super deep, so if you just need like a lighthearted, happy, low stakes fantasy, Travis Baldree is a great place to start. When I read in just over 24 hours, and I sometimes forget my brain is capable of doing this, I don't think that this is necessarily one to read if you're really down to crunch time, you're trying to fly through books, because you might not fly through it. It's a pretty dense book nonetheless. But I myself did read this in less than 24 hours, and that is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. If you don't know what this is, welcome to the internet. Fourth Wing has been all over Book Talk, BookTube, Bookstagram. I even did a whole reading blog of Fourth Wing. I feel like it dominated the bookish social media space this year. This is about kind of like a Harry Potter Hunger Games with dragons sort of vibe, where we have this like war college setting. Our main character Violet has been training to be a scribe her whole life and ends up in the writer's quadrant, where she learns to be a warrior and ride dragons and becomes like a dragon writer situation. It's got a little bit of spice, got a little bit of romance, some high fantasy world building, a very, very cool magic system, and also like kind of a big betrayal towards the end. So this, though, I will say is supposed to be a 5-book series. I find when I'm trying to just like read through books and kind of escape, series aren't the best fit for me if they're not all out. If it's a series that's fully published, I will just bing, 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 fly through all of them. But if not, it can be hit or miss, so be aware. This just like took over my existence. Like I had to know what was going to happen next. I don't know, I was just obsessed, truthfully. Like I said, this is not by any means a short book. This is 508 pages. So do with that information what you will. This was another hint I forgot, or a tip I forgot to give at the beginning of this video, but sometimes rereads, something you're already familiar with that is comforting, can also help you read a little bit more quickly if you're looking to make up some gains on your Goodreads goal. This book I talked about last year, I believe, in this video, but if not, I feel like I'm always recommending this book. So if you need a book recommendation for a YA thriller mystery, here we are. That is Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. There is a trilogy of mysteries that make up the main mystery. This follows Stevie Bell, who is a student at Ellingham Academy, which is basically a small academy in Vermont for gifted children. She goes there with the intention of solving a century-old murder that took place at Ellingham Academy with the founder's wife and daughter. And then when she gets there, some of her fellow students end up being murdered as well. So she's solving 2 mysteries in one. There are also 2 additional spin-off mysteries that come off of this main trilogy. There's The Box in the Woods and 9 Liars. I read 9 Liars in literally one day this year. That was a chunky book. That was like 550 pages. It was the first full book that I read in 2023. Literally read it in 24 hours. So these are really fast-paced, gripping sort of YA thriller mysteries. What I really like about about Maureen Johnson's writing is it's just very, I don't know, the way she writes mysteries, I feel like I have the pieces to solve along with our main character, even though I can never figure it out on my own, which I just enjoy. It's a more engaging mystery experience for me, but I also feel like at the very end of every chapter, there is a pivotal reveal or a new key piece of evidence that comes to light that I have to know what happens next, which is literally how I read 9 Liars in 24 hours. This is a series that I love, and I especially think this ties into like a reread or a familiarity aspect that can make meeting your reading goal a little bit easier. That is the Twisted Tale series. This one in particular is Go the Distance, which is a twisted retelling of the Hercules movie. The twist here is, what if Meg had to become a Greek god? Instead of Hercules becoming mortal at the end of the movie, Meg becomes a Greek god to stay with him. I'm specifically recommending this one because this is, again, very, very simple 3-act structure, or like a 3-challenge series. So Meg has to complete 3 challenges to become a god. So it's very easy to follow plot-wise. It's not very involved or windy or confusing. This is also very short. This is 325 pages, another very quick read. I read this one, again, in 24 hours this year, and I really, really enjoyed it. I just love the Twisted Tales. They have, despite being like new stories and retellings, they have a nostalgia factor for me that is just so comforting, in diving back into a world in a movie that I already know and love. So I think that these can be really, really great if you're trying to add some quick reads to your final reading stretch for the year. This book, again, I think I ranted about plenty last year because I loved it so much, but I'm gonna bring it back again as a recommendation because new books have come out this year in this series. But The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynne Barnes. This, again, is similar to Truly Devious in that it's a main trilogy, and then some spin-off novels. So I read the 3rd book, which was The Queen's Gambit, in 24 hours again this year. Just was obsessed. But this follows Avery Graham, who is willed a billionaire's fortune. To her knowledge, she's never met this billionaire, so she's randomly kind of just like plucked out of her ordinary life of very rags to riches stories, as she's now the heir to this billionaire fortune. She also has then surpassed his 4 grandsons to get the fortune. She can only collect his inheritance with the stipulation that she has to survive living in the house with his grandchildren for 1 year. Some of them are out together to really want to get this fortune, some don't care at all, but it's also kind of just like following her through this weird transition moment in her life. This billionaire is also a huge fan of puzzles and riddles and games, so you see Avery follow and solve a lot of those different mysteries and puzzles, and also figure out why of all the people she was chosen to inherit all of his billions. It is an addictive series. I literally remember last year I read this one in 24 hours and I immediately called my boyfriend to drive me to Barnes & Noble to go get the 2nd one. When the 3rd one came out, I wasn't ready for the series to end, but luckily the series is not over. She keeps giving us some spin-off novels. And I did read The Queen's Gambit in 24 hours, stayed up way past my bedtime to do so, and I'm not even mad about it. This is a more recent one, and this is gonna be more of a generalized recommendation. Some romance novels are not the most complex writing storylines you will ever encounter, and so I think that if you just need to kind of like escape into a little romance for a day, you could probably knock out a good old romance, get a book off of your TBR. I also think that romances can be really predictable in the sense that I have not encountered a romance where you don't have a happy ending. Okay, you also know that there's usually a third act breakup, like we have the like exposition, we build, we're so in love, and then we do something tragically wrong, we break up for a little bit, we make up, kiss, make up, and then happy ending. For example, Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. I just read this in literally 24 hours last weekend. This was a bit of a longer one. This was just over 420 pages, but I flew through this, and I think it was the predictability of the structure. Also, like, this got a little twisty turny where it was like, do we like each other? Do we hate each other? Do we like each other? That I was kind of like hooked in and engaged. So I think finding any like kind of contemporary romance, you're gonna follow that plot arc. It's gonna be not the most intense writing you've ever encountered, not the most intense plot you've ever encountered. Go escape into a little happily ever after for a little bit. Okay, We Were Liars by Lockhart. I think is not seasonally appropriate if you're looking to like do end of the year reading, because it's very summer coded, but it was a very, very good book. I read this in 24 hours back in April. I think I actually don't know how this would be coded. This is a young adult book. It may classify as a thriller, but there wasn't like a intense, like your heart's racing thriller, but this followed our main character who had suffered some kind of like mental episode, and she experienced something traumatic the previous summer. She comes from a very well-off family who kind of every summer go vacation on a private island. I want to say near Martha's Vineyard, like right around Massachusetts coast area. Very wealthy, have very complicated, twisty family dynamics, but something happened the summer before and she cannot remember that summer at all. Like, she has blocked it from her mind. And what's interesting is when she goes to this island for the current summer, she is kind of slowly putting together the pieces of what happened the previous summer, and it's almost very traumatic for her. And you realize that she's talking to a lot of people who are actually dead, and you kind of uncover the role that she played in this traumatic event that happened the previous summer. This book is not maybe the best book I've ever read in the world, but I was so sucked in. I was like, I need to figure out what happened. And as she's slowly piecing together these things that happened the previous summer and like regaining her memories, I just had to know what happened. So I literally read this in 24 hours. I think it's really good. Again, it's a YA. It's not overly complicated in terms of plot, in terms of writing, in terms of language. It's also just like a really interesting story and concept, I thought. Also just trying to figure out and see if you can solve it before the narrator reveals it to you, I think is always a pretty engaging reading experience. This one I'm going to recommend because it was pretty short. This is a vignette style book, and it's called Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. I thought they were all intertwined stories, but they're not. But it's basically a story set, and I think it's in Tokyo. There is a coffee shop where you can time travel, but there are some stipulations. Like, you can go time travel, but if you go back in the past, you can't change anything that happened. Your reality, your present is still going to be the same. The only thing, so you don't become a ghost, is you have to come back before the coffee gets cold. You only have a limited amount of time in this memory. So this book followed 4 different people as they traveled to this coffee shop to go back to pivotal moments in their lives, or just revisit a happier time in their life, and their story of what they did in their time traveling. They do interconnect a little bit, but I thought it was like they really are all intertwined. But we have some stories that are just complete strangers. They all vaguely pass each other by. Their stories aren't interconnected. They all encounter each other at some point. But this book was pretty short. This is 213 pages, so I read through this literally in a day, just exploring these different kind of memories. I really liked this book, but I think I had it set in my mind to be more intertwined, more involved than it really was. It's also translated, so that kind of leads some language disconnects, so just be aware of that. I gave this 3 stars overall, but I think it was an interesting concept and I'm not mad that I read it. This one I definitely read in 24 hours. This took over my life again. Some of these books have been doing this lately, man. This is 5 Survive by Holly Jackson. She is the author of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I personally liked this book a lot better. 5 Survive was a standalone, but it follows this girl, Ruby. I think her name is Ruby or Red? Red is her name. She and her friends go on an RV camping road trip for spring break. They are driving overnight in this RV when they get a flat tire. They quickly realize that once they get that tire fixed and up and running again, and then all 4 of their tires are shot out, that they are not stuck here by accident. Somebody has hunted them to this very isolated, abandoned area where they have no cell service, they have no street lights, and are being actively hunted by somebody outside this RV. This is a gripping, thrilling, like high intensity thriller novel. This was for sure a heart-racing book. It's also written again as a thriller that you feel like you can kind of piece together the things as you're going along. Like there are some evidence exhibits written into this book, which I always think are fun and engaging. But truthfully, I think the writing, the pacing, and the concept of this book were so gripping and intense that I literally could not put it down. I literally remember being on the train in Boston and feeling like, oh my God, somebody is watching me. Like I am in this RV being hunted, even though I'm like literally in the middle of Boston. There were plenty of other books that took, oh, the heavens have entered the chat. There are plenty of other books that I've read in like just over a day or around a day, but those are the ones that I've literally read in 24 hours. I think if you can reread middle grade, poetry collections are usually pretty brief if you want to read those. They're also, I find, very therapeutic to just like take an hour, read a nice poetry collection, and walk away with some good mantras or reminders or things like that. Middle grade obviously is pretty accessible, usually large font and a bit shorter. Rereads, absolutely recommend, but those are some of the books that I read in 24 hours. These are all the tips and tricks that I have to up your reading or to meet your Goodreads goal or read a little bit more in the end of the year if that's something that you're hoping to do. I would love for you to let me know if you have any tips or tricks. Some of them haven't changed from last year, but I would love to see if there are any new tips and tricks going around that I should try. Also, let me know, what was your goal to read this year and how close are you to making it? And are there any books that you read in 24 hours? I want all the details on your end of year reading experience. Leave me a little star emoji and let me know those answers down in the comments down below. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful, and I will see you in my next one. Have a wonderful day wherever you are, and happy reading. Bye-bye.